Thank you. We will now proceed on with the division on amendment number 6, and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. I have a point of order, first of all, from the Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I couldn't vote. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Your vote will be recorded. A point of order from Ivan McKee.
Couldn't get it connected. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Minister. Your vote will be recorded. I have a point of order from Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr McMillan. Your vote will be recorded. I have a point of order from Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Nicholl. Your vote will be recorded. I have a point of order from Lorna Slater.
Presiding Officer, I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Slater. Your vote will be recorded. Is there about making a point? But she wasn't in the chamber. Well, she could have been. To be fair, some of the others that you just take went. Oh, right, okay. Is she making a point of order, Sarah Boyack?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. Point of order, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no. I couldn't connect.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 6 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes, 6, no, 97. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 179 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 123. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 179 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 179 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 32, no 71. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 180 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 123. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 180 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Sarah Boyack.
I tried to vote. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 180 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 31, no 73. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendments 181, 182, 183, 184, 185, 186, 187, 188, 189, 190 and 191, all in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 123. I would ask Mr Mountain if he can indicate whether or not he intends to move amendments 181 to 191.
I am not going to move them, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. The member has indicated that they will not be moving amendments 181 to 191. It would be helpful if any member who wishes to move any of these amendments from 181 to 191 could indicate now. No member has so indicated, and I therefore confirm for the record that the following amendments in the name of Edward Mountain are not moved. Amendments 181, 182, 183, 184, 185, 186, 187, 188, 189, 190 and 191. We will now move to Group 10, dealing with evictions. And I call Amendment 79 in the name of Megan Gallagher, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. And I call on Megan Gallagher to move Amendment 79 and to speak to all amendments of the group. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The amendments that I'm bringing forward in this section of the bill strengthen the bill to include terminal illness when we are dealing with evictions. And if I can start by thanking the Cabinet Secretary, both Shirley-Anne Somerville and Mary McCallan, and their officials for not only being sympathetic to my proposals at stage 2, but also working with me to produce amendments to support families living with a terminal illness. Presiding Officer, we do have a lot of amendments to get through this afternoon, and it is not my intention to go through each and every one of the amendments, because what they do add to the bill is that when they are considering factors that either courts or first-tier tribunals are looking at when looking at evictions, they consider the impact of a tenant or a member of the tenant's household due to the tenant or household member having a terminal illness. And I think this is a very compassionate way to look at the bill when we are looking at evictions. If I may also thank Marie Curie for the exceptional work that they have carried out in trying to gain cross-party consensus on this issue. They've been working hard alongside their other colleagues, trying to speak to MSPs regarding evictions and how we look at evictions in a compassionate way. If I may just speak briefly about Marie Curie and the evidence that they have found and what led to the amendments being submitted, because they found that approximately 27,600 people in Scotland every year must move home because of a close bereavement. The amendments to the Housing Bill will make huge improvements to terminally ill tenants and provide bereaved families with every opportunity to succeed a property or remain in their own homes. Dying in the Margins, a research study by University of Glasgow and Marie Curie, which documents the direct impact of financial hardship on terminally ill people, and it has been central to informing amendments to the Housing Bill, particularly the story of Stacey and Just, who faced significant issues in getting an accessible home when they met Stacey's need, followed by a decision taken to evict Stacey's widower from their home just 12 days after Stacey died. These amendments will go some way to preventing instances like this from happening again, ensuring everyone is treated with dignity throughout their end-of-life experience. And that's why we need to thank the wonderful team at Marie Curie for raising this issue with myself and other MSPs, and for their tenacity to continuing to improve conditions for people with a terminal illness. Again, Presiding Officer, for the consideration of time this afternoon, I will just briefly speak to a couple of the other amendments, but I don't intend to speak to them all, just given that we are up against it. Amendments 7 and 44 by Maggie Chapman were brought forward at stage 2, I believe, and although I do understand the argument the member has made, I still believe that they are unworkable. I do hope that members vote against it should they be pressed, because I do believe that it could create more problems regarding evictions before the period begins or ends, and that could of course put pressures on other housing options, including social housing. Amendment 197 and 197A have prompted a stark warning from industry bodies regarding the evictions in the first 12 months of a tenancy. In my view, and I have gone on the record regarding this, I do believe it is a gift to rogue landlords and will drive more good landlords out of the sector. And that, of course, in turn will worsen the housing emergency. So I hope Maggie Chapman will not press those amendments. Amendment 284 and 284A that requires landlords to pay tenants' removal costs. I think this imposes unreasonable financial burdens, even in eviction cases which are lawful and accepted as necessary. Again, we cannot afford to risk discouraging property letting, particularly among small-scale landlords. And I do believe, again, that it could further reduce the housing supply. I do believe it also adds complexity and potential for dispute, straining the tribunal system even further. I know there are amendments in this grouping, Presiding Officer, but again, for timing, I will leave my remarks there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I now call Edward Mountain to speak to Amendment 192 and other amendments in the group. Mr Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and just want to reiterate the declaration I made yesterday that I am a landlord letting houses under PRTs. I also have houses which are let or given to individuals as part of the job. I've been letting houses for over 30 years. I'm a qualified surveyor, and before I was involved with politics, I was letting houses for fun. Just so there's no accusation that I ever have used weasel words to cover up what I'm doing. Now, moving to amendments 192 to 196, Presiding Officer, these are to ensure that at the end of a tenancy where eviction is to be carried out, it must be done within 4 months of the end of the tenancy. Now, the reason and the rationale behind this is that every month that the tenant stays there, incapable or not paying rent, increases the burden on that person to pay the rent at a later stage. At stage 2, the amendments were for suggested 3 months, and so I'm now probing to see whether the Cabinet Secretary would agree with me that 4 months is more reasonable than 3, and therefore would be in a position to support this. I don't believe that it restricts the discretion of tribunals and courts. It just gives them deadlines to work to. Amendments 394, 395, 396 and 397 are regarding evictions for antisocial behaviour, in that they relate to PRTs, secure tenancy, assured tenancy and protected statutory tenancies. They would mandate for each type of tenancy the tribunal's specified eviction period for a person for antisocial behaviour should be no more than 2 months. Now, this has been specifically put in at the request of people not who are landlords, but people who are tenants, that they have been told that tenants in the next door house to them have been behaving antisocially, in some cases drug users and drug sellers, which has caused problems to the people in the tenancies, and they never seem to be moved on. And it's happened on various places around Inverness and across the Highlands. So I think it is perfectly reasonable that once antisocial behaviour has been proved, that there should be a finite amount of time before that tenant is moved on. I would obviously support Megan Gallagher's amendments, which I'm delighted, I think, to perceive that the Cabinet Secretary and the Government will support regarding terminal illness. It seems totally appropriate that that is the case. I can't support Amendment 8 in the name of Maggie Chapman for extending the eviction period for 12 months in certain circumstances if the landlord, for example, intends to sell the property or to alleviate financial hardship. All you're doing is creating more financial hardship for the landlord and tilting it too far, in my mind, in favour of the tenant. I also think that Amendments 198 and 198A is just unfair on both parties, and there's no justification for eviction notices to be shortened just to purely extended beyond 16 weeks. Now, Maggie Chapman in Amendments 77 and 44 is proposing a five-month ban on evictions every year. I think that's during the winter period. So that means that whatever the problems are, that if it's during the winter, you can't evict a tenant. I'm not sure I see the logic of that, and I'll be looking forward to her arguments. It looks like it's becoming a bit like a transfer window for football teams, that it can't happen at certain times of the year. I would also just mention Amendments 284 and 284A, where the removal costs would be paid by the landlord. I actually think that is completely unjust, and I see no reason for it, in the sense that it is the tenant's equipment that is to be moved out, and it should be for the tenant to move it on in the same way they moved it in to their house. But, you know, if Ms Chapman expects us on these side to support Amendment 284 and 284A, i.e. to compensate the tenant for moving out, if she can give me an assurance that they will support 206 and 214, which requires tenants to pay for the cleaning costs at the end of the tenancy if they've kept a pet, then I might, of course, be in a position to support her. The other issue is that I think Katie Clark's Amendment 288, Presiding Officer, if the landlord has tried to sell the property and has been unable to sell the property, that they can't let the property. That means that they would be burdened, just because of the state of the market, with double council tax on that property for the period that it is unable to let.
Mr Mountain, can I please ask you to bring your remarks to a close?
I'm just doing that.
Perfect, because if we all stick to roughly the time limits, then we'll get through all the business we need to. Thank you.
I think that is unjust. I'll leave it there, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I think I had said at the beginning that we would appreciate succinct contributions. I think the expectation is around 5 minutes from members with a right to speak, maximum, so I think that was fair. I now call Maggie Chapman to speak to Amendment 8 and other amendments in the group. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And just to be clear, I will not be pressing Amendments 7, 8 or 25 in this group. A warm, safe home that we can call our own is central to our well-being. That being the case, forcing someone out of their home should only be done in the most rare and unavoidable circumstances. At the moment, eviction notice periods work differently depending on how long you have been in the property, and I struggle to see the justification in that. Being forced from your home against your will, being made homeless, is going to have an impact regardless on how long you have been there. That being the case, my Amendment 198 provides a 4-month notice period for everyone, so all tenants are treated equally. It also has the virtue of simplifying the system. Amendment 197 provides a 12-month protection from eviction in the same way as the Renters' Rights Bill is shortly to give tenants in England. This would ensure both that people have a guarantee of a minimum 1 year of stability in their home and ensures protections in Scotland don't fall behind those of other parts of the UK. Both these amendments have the support of Living Rent, Crisis and Shelter, which I welcome and thank them for. They are the experts in supporting renters and are not troubled by the concerns raised by the Conservatives. I do note that similar provisions were part of the Conservative government's Renters Reform Bill, so I would encourage them to consider their position. The Liberal Democrats too supported the Commons' third reading. Yes.
Edward Mountain.
I thank the member for taking an intervention. I think it's an interesting thing if you're not allowed to end a tenancy within the first 12 months. Should it not refer also to the tenant not being able to end the tenancy within the first 12 months, not just the landlord? That would seem to be equitable and fair, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the member has a view.
Maggie Chapman.
I think tenants and landlords are not equal in the situation. The landlord owns the asset. The tenant is at risk of losing their home. Those are two very, very different situations. The Liberal Democrats too supported the Commons' third reading of the Renters' Rights Bill that has these same provisions, so I trust they will be consistent and support Amendments 197 and 198. If not, their constituents may well ask why Lib Dem MPs voted to give better protections for English renters and MSPs are voting the very same, are not voting for the same protections for those renting in Scotland. Because let's be clear, if these amendments are not supported today, renters in Scotland will be less strongly protected than those south of the border. If the government still cannot vote for these amendments, which have such wide support, I ask it at least to support Amendment 33, which would ensure eviction protections compared to the rest of the UK are kept under review. Amendment 44 provides a ban on winter evictions, specifically between November and March. Disallowing evictions within the winter period is not at all experimental. We've had a substantial evictions pause before in Scotland recently, and almost the same measure as I'm proposing have been in force in France for 70 years. In a country that can be as cold as ours, I don't think I need to press home the point too strongly that we should not be moving people out of their homes and into often poorly insulated temporary accommodation, and where new arrangements don't work out, onto our freezing streets. There are, of course, appropriate exemptions and exceptions, but the ban will apply for most of the common eviction grounds. I understand the Scottish Government's approach to flexing evictions prizes that flexibility, and this is appropriate when ensuring evictions do not coincide with things like exams taken by a member of a household, which can happen at any time of the year. But it's totally different for winter evictions. As we all know, from sliding down the Royal Mile to Parliament in the ice and snow, Scotland is reliably cold in the last few months and first few months of the year. The Scottish Government's approach is simply asking for inconsistency across the piece. The bill says that tribunals may consider delaying an eviction due to a seasonal factor, but they may not, and they may also differ on the interpretation of what a seasonal factor is. If the Cabinet Secretary is not intending to support this proposal, I have one simple question. The Scottish Government, including both my party and that of the Cabinet Secretary, brought in an evictions pause through the Cost of Living Act. So if it was the right thing to do then, why is it not right now? Amendment 284 gives effect to a long-standing ask from Generation Rent. It would empower, but not require, ministers to establish a system whereby those evicted on no-fault grounds, like for the sale of a property, they could be compensated. This is in recognition for the significant costs tenants incur when being evicted, when being made homeless, let's be clear. Polling on this by Survation for Generation Rent shows how much money tenants lose. 52% of tenants report they took more than 4 days to pack, move and clean at the end of a tenancy, often requiring time off work, which can be costly for those who don't have the leave available. Due to overlapping tenancies, 40% of the private tenants reported they paid rent on more than one property at once when moving home, and over a third of those paid rent on 2 properties for more than 2 weeks. And all this is not to mention the costs of cleaning or having the property cleaned, and hiring vehicles to move renters' furniture and other items. When upfront costs, deposits...
Ms Chapman, can I ask you to bring your remarks to a close, please?
I will do very, very quickly. When upfront costs are so high, we need these protections. It's a modest measure. There are a number of other amendments in this group which I support, but I don't have time to speak to them. I'll leave it there. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much, Ms Chapman. I now call Mark Griffin to speak to Amendment 285 and other amendments in the group. Mr Griffin.
Thank you, President Officer. Amendment 285 seeks to place, I think, sensible restrictions on the issuing of eviction orders where a landlord has recently received an Eco4 grant to improve the energy efficiency of a property. Now, for members that might not be aware, landlords who receive that Eco4 grant is based entirely on the income and personal circumstances of the tenant and their property. So this amendment would seek to give the tenant protection from eviction for 12 months. It would seem strange that the government would grant money to a landlord to upgrade a property to improve energy efficiency, to save a tenant money based on the tenant's circumstances, and then a landlord remove them after receiving that grant. Members will recall that I lodged a similar amendment at stage 2, and at that time the government discounted the proposal, arguing that it didn't allow for extenuating circumstances to be considered for landlords. So, in listening to that feedback and in response, have amended that proposal at stage 3 to address those concerns now. The revised amendment now makes clear that where a landlord has received an Eco4 grant in the previous 12 months, the tribunal must not grant an eviction order on certain grounds, such as intended to sell, carry out disruptive works or move in themselves, unless, having considered the landlord's circumstances, it's reasonable to do so. I think that is a solid compromise position from the amendment that I lodged at stage 2 and asked members to support. On Amendments 286 and 287, which would require Scottish ministers to undertake a review of the eviction grounds in Schedule 3 of the Private Residential Tenancies Act 2016 and in other tenancy types within 24 months of this bill coming into force. Over the last few years, evidence from the first-tier tribunal and the experiences shared by tenant organisations have highlighted that some of the current eviction grounds do not always deliver a fair balance between tenant and landlord rights. While many of these grounds are technically discretionary, there are still loopholes that can be exploited, leaving tenants at risk of losing their homes unfairly. The changes made to eviction grounds during the pandemic demonstrated that reform is possible and can make a real difference to tenant security, but it's clear that more comprehensive action is needed to address the underlying issues in this system. Part 2 of this bill takes important steps to tighten the rules around evictions, but these amendments go further by calling for a full review of the framework itself. This is about ensuring that our tenancy laws are fit for purpose, based on lessons learned since the 2016 Act was introduced and the subsequent changes that have followed. Presiding Officer, we will all have heard of cases where tenants have been told that a property is being listed for sale and they are evicted, only for them to see it listed for a higher price a few months down the line. Those aren't isolated stories, and it points to a wider problem within the system that needs to be addressed at its root. Presiding Officer, ultimately these proposals are about rebalancing the system, protecting tenants from unfair eviction, while ensuring landlords can still act where there is a genuine need, and ask members to support Amendments 286 and 287. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Katie Clark to speak to Amendment 288 and other amendments in the group. Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I speak to Amendments 288 and 289 in my name. Amendment 288 relates to eviction orders for occupied properties on grounds of sale, where the landlord seemingly abandons plans to sell. Generation Rent found that in 2022 that nearly a third of private landlords who evicted tenants in order to sell their property had failed to sell the property more than a year later. We know of many situations where tenants are evicted on grounds of sale, where the property is put back on the rental market at a higher rent, and this amendment is to address that scenario. This amendment would restrict landlords from letting or attempting to let the property in question within 6 months of an eviction order being granted. This change would bring the law in Scotland in line with the provisions outlined in the UK Government's Renters' Rights Bill, which has been debated at Westminster over recent months, and therefore would bring the law in Scotland in line with the rest of the UK. I noted that Edward Mountain said that he believed that this would mean that the landlord would pay double council tax, but of course that is not the position when there is an attempt to sell a property, and no doubt we can come back to that later if the member doesn't accept that point. Amendment 289 seeks to strengthen the criminal law in relation to wrongful termination. This offence criminalises the act of intentionally misleading a tenant into ceasing to occupy a let property and misleading the first-tier tribunal into issuing an eviction law. Of course, there are already criminal offences relating to these types of matters. However, this amendment would increase the maximum penalties for such offences, which would be appropriate in the situations where there are repeat offenders. There are already offences for unlawful eviction, and this amendment simply strengthens the law in this area, increasing penalties. Both these amendments are supported by Living Rent and other campaigns.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I've got a number of members who want to make brief contributions. I call first Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if I can just speak to a couple of the amendments that are in this section. Firstly, can I welcome Megan Gallagher's amendments around terminal illness? Can I also put on record the work that Marie Curie have done on this and how they have brought cross-party support on it? I think this will make a big difference to people's lives, and I think as a Parliament we have a good record in regard to helping people who have terminal illness. Could I also speak to Amendment 283, which is also in the name of Megan Gallagher? Can I remind members that I am a member and elder of the Church of Scotland? This amendment deals with property that is owned by churches and other faiths, where, for example, it is a church manse. As many of us are aware, there have been a number of churches closing and merging over the last number of years, and while people are looking for new ministers or pastors, that house remains empty. The churches are looking for a way where they can allow people to use that house while that church is vacant, but then when a new minister is appointed, for that house to then be made available for the church to use for that individual. We have debated this on a number of occasions, and I am disappointed that this amendment has never been accepted by the Parliament or by the government. We all know there is a housing shortage, and any house that comes available for however long a period should be grabbed and used. If this amendment is not passed today, then many churches and denominations will simply leave that property empty because they know that they will acquire it in months to come forward. So I do hope that the government and this Parliament will accept Amendment 283, and my thanks again to Megan Gallagher for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. Just a reminder that members participating remotely should have their cameras on when they are participating. I call next Keith Brown.
That's you.
Or Fulton McGregor. I call Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I want to speak briefly on Edward Mountain's Amendment 192 on behalf of a constituent who's been following this bill and has reached out to me and asked for representation here. By way of some background, my constituent attempted to evict a tenant who had been antisocial. The first-tier tribunal delayed hearings, which caused a huge financial strain on my constituent, leading to tens of thousands of pounds worth of losses and a huge financial and emotional impact on her and her family. My constituent believes that had this amendment been in place, it would have given her a set time frame to allow her to budget for an eviction. In the end, the process dragged on so long that the situation was solved out with the tribunal system. Basically, a letting agency stepped in and moved the tenant to a different property. My constituent has been badly affected by the experience and, as you will imagine, is reconsidering her options in the future in terms of being a landlord. Well, because of this case, I do have some sympathy. I probably should say that I cannot support the amendment for a number of reasons, including the risk that it undermines fairness. The strict deadlines may force tribunals to rush complex cases without properly considering the circumstances of vulnerable tenants, and there could be a risk of unjust outcomes and homelessness. Threat to judicial independence, legislating rigid timescales, Timeframes could be seen as political interference in how tribunals operate and manage caseloads. And administrative impracticality. Tribunals are already under-resourced. Imposing deadlines without additional funding or staffing could create procedural chaos and even more appeals. So for these reasons, I can't support the amendment. However, as I've said, I do have great sympathy with it, and I wonder, in summing up, or when it comes to the Cabinet Secretary, if she would be able to outline ways in which the principle of Edward Mountain's amendment in this area could be achieved in practice while still safeguarding vulnerable people. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And just before moving to the detail here, I just want to assure you that the Government will be, the brevity will be the word of the day for the Government. However, having a responsibility, as we see it, to respond to members' amendments and to give them the courtesy of that, I won't necessarily be able to do that in 5 minutes for every group where there are very many amendments, but I will keep it as short as possible. And beginning, therefore, with Amendments 79 to 86 in Megan Gallagher's name, I want to thank her. I want to thank Marie Curie and also Mark Griffin, who was involved in this work as well, for their engagement with me. We know that the eviction process is exceptionally difficult for anybody, but particularly those with terminal illness. So I'm very pleased to be able to support Megan Gallagher's amendments. Turning to those, however, in Megan Gallagher's name, Amendment 283, which seeks to create the exemption from the duty to consider the delay enforcement of evictions specifically for the Church of Scotland. I'm afraid that as we set out at stage 2, I'm not persuaded that an exemption in these circumstances is appropriate. The current legal framework ensures that the rights of both landlords and tenants are taken into account in any decision to delay the enforcement of eviction, and this means that a delay will only be ordered where it's reasonable in all the circumstances to do so. The type of landlord and the purpose to which the property is used in and of itself does not merit a standalone exemption. Yes, Mr.
Briefly, Willie Rennie.
The practical effect of this, however, is that manses are lying empty. I know personally of manses that have lain empty as a result of this provision. So whatever the law is, the practical effect is that we've got homes that are empty that could be used. Can she not find a way to resolve that problem?
Cabinet Secretary.
I will certainly continue engagement with Church of Scotland, and I do take the point that Willie Rennie puts to me. I don't want to see any houses, manses or otherwise, lying empty, but I suppose in the question of primary legislation, it's already legislated for that circumstances such as those can be taken into account. I don't think in these circumstances they merit creating a standalone exemption for the Church of Scotland, not least because that doesn't include other religious bodies, but I will stay engaged in these issues. Edward Mountain's amendments 192 to 196 would prevent tribunals and courts from ordering a delay to an eviction of longer than 4 months. I don't think it's appropriate to restrict the discretion of the courts in this way. They need to be able to make orders as they deem reasonable, based on all the circumstances that they have before them and that they need to take into account. Also, I think that by linking the start of the period to the day after proceedings are raised by the landlord, we could risk in some cases there being no delay or minimal delay at all, and that really undermines the purpose of the measures in the bill, so I can't support these. Unable also to support Mr Mountain's other amendments, 394 to 397, these would place a requirement on the courts and tribunal that in cases where antisocial behaviour grounds have been satisfied, an eviction order must be made no later than 2 months from the date of application. I have listened to what Mr Mountain has said on these, but I can't support them. There's a number of reasons, but principally the bill already contains an exemption from the duty to consider delay of an eviction on antisocial behaviour grounds. This means that it's, again, a matter for the court or tribunal to issue the eviction order as they deem fit, and nothing in the bill currently or should hinder the judicial process in that regard. I will not speak to Amendments 8 from Maggie Chapman, as she's indicated that she will not press them, but I'll move to Amendment 198, which seek to address concerns by providing ministers with regulation-making powers to change the notice period that a landlord must give to a tenant when ending a tenancy, so that the notice period is 16 weeks in certain circumstances. And it would also require that this is applied to evictions in cases where the ground for eviction relates to the sale of property. Connectedly, 198A would turn this into a duty to make regulations. Firstly, converting the power to a duty is defective because it fetters Parliament's role and remit. And I think on the substance, further work is required to understand the implications of increased notice periods before changes are made, and the repossession grounds review that will be conducted provides a mechanism for this detailed work. Amendment 197 and consequential 265 would give regulation-making powers to ministers relating to protection against eviction within the first 12 months of the tenancy. These are, again, inflexible provisions. As I've said previously, these issues are best considered as part of our review of repossession grounds, allowing that fulsome and proper assessment of, firstly, how the current system is operating and how it might operate better. And I can confirm to Parliament, because I know the question of eviction grounds is a concern for many members, that that review will begin before the end of this year, and I'd welcome members' involvement in it. Turning to Amendments 197A, this would turn the power in Amendment 197 into a duty, again removing Parliament's role, which is not something that the Government could support. Amendments 7 and 25, these have been debated today. They seek to reintroduce that winter evictions ban that would apply every year from November until April, except in limited circumstances. The same amendments were lodged at stage 2 and not agreed, and for the same reasons that we set out then, I can't support them.
Will the Cabinet Secretary give way?
Yes, I will do.
Kevin Stewart,
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. And those amendments on winter eviction moratorium, it has been stated that that may constitute a disproportionate control of the use of a landlord's property. Yet we managed to do that during the course of COVID. Ms Chapman said it was during the cost of living crisis, but it was mainly for COVID. It's been said that existing powers in the bill already allow for consideration of a delay year-round, with the discretion for the court and tribunal to apply as they deem reasonable in the circumstances of each case. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she is going to continue to monitor all of that so that we get this right for people right across the board? Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Kevin Stewart for the intervention. I will, of course, keep a close eye on these matters, and in particular how the courts and tribunals use those existing powers to delay the enforcement of an eviction at any time of the year. And it's worth noting that seasonal impact is set out as one of the specific factors that can be considered. There's two other reasons why I don't think this is necessarily appropriate. Firstly, there's other times of year where particular strain means that protection could be argued for, other religious periods, exam periods, etc. The other point I would note is that a ban of this type, we risk creating a flood of cases come April, rather than having the ability to deal with matters throughout the year. So I can't support these amendments, and Maggie Chapman's amendments 44 and 50 are alternatives, so the same issues apply. Skipping forward as quickly as I can, Presiding Officer, Amendment 284 would enable ministers to require payment of removal costs if a tenant is being evicted from a residential property. It's not clear from the amendment who would pay for this, but I think by implication it would be the landlord. We committed at stage 2, when a similar amendment was lodged, to consider the need to assess the impact of payments for removal costs. Whilst 284 would not compel ministers to make regulations, I'm concerned about supporting legislation where the justification has not been fully understood and the provision is not clear. For the same reason, I have significantly greater concerns about 284A, which would require ministers to take forward regulations regardless of the need for an impact of any changes. So, for those reasons and some other technical problems with the amendment, I can't support them. In respect of 37, I'm unconvinced for the need for an unlimited ongoing statutory requirement for a 5-yearly review of protections. Ministers can already carry out a review of eviction protections in the social and private rented sector whenever it is considered appropriate to do so. Mark Griffin's Amendment 285, which he's explained, seeks to address concerns about a small number of landlords acting unreasonably after receiving ECO4 funding. I do remain of the view that this amendment isn't necessary and I can't support it. Our current framework provides protection already from unreasonable eviction in these circumstances, and this is because in Scotland, all grounds for eviction are discretionary, and the Tribunal can take into account all the circumstances in the case. However, I do agree that there are concerns about ECO4. This is a UK Government scheme. We did ask UK ministers to make changes last year, I understand that it was, to strengthen those safeguards, but they weren't able to do so at the time. So I would welcome Mark Griffin's support in seeking to have those changes made. Amendment 286 introduces a requirement on ministers to carry out a review of the reposition grounds under the Private Housing Tenancy Scotland Act 2016. However, as I've said, I am committed to a review of all of eviction grounds and I would welcome members' engagement in that. Finally, Presiding Officer, Amendment 287 would, similarly to the previous amendment, require ministers to carry out a review of repossession grounds across all of the main tenancy regimes, including the social sector. I've not heard any calls for a review in the social rented sector, and I don't believe that it's appropriate to do so. This amendment would also require us to carry out reviews of types of tenancies that are scarcely used. Amendment 288 from Katie Clark. I absolutely understand the intent behind it, but unfortunately I can't support it. We set out in stage 2 in relation to a similar amendment that any additional restrictions and measures in relation to wrongful termination, they need very careful consideration, that this should be done through the review of repossession grounds to ensure the right balance. And I understand her intention has been to ensure that certain repossession grounds cannot be used spuriously, but it would be already open to a tenant in those circumstances to apply to the Tribunal for a wrongful termination order. And similarly, in respect of 289, which would introduce a new offence, I want to assure Katie Clark that there is an existing offence through the Scottish Tribunal's Offences in Relation to Proceeding Regulations 2016, which could result in imprisonment of up to 2 years, a fine or both. So for all of those reasons, I would ask members to support Ms Gallagher's amendments 79 to 86, Mr Griffin in 286, but otherwise not press or not support.
Thank you. I call Megan Gallagher to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 79. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And if I may thank the Chamber, as I don't believe that any member has spoken against my amendments in relation to terminal illness. But again, to also thank colleagues who have engaged with Marie Curie and have been fully supportive of what these amendments try to achieve. Because again, as the Cabinet Secretary laid out, when you have a terminal illness and you are experiencing evictions, that's an added pressure not onto what you're dealing with personally, but of course what your family are dealing with as well. And it's good to see that we're all working together in order to add some compassion onto the face of the bill. So I just want to add my thanks to everyone who has worked with Marie Curie in order to make this possible. If I can, and then this is just really briefly, and I'll close my remarks after this, amendments 283 in my name regarding the religious properties and the points that have been raised by colleagues Jeremy Balfour and Willie Rennie. I still believe that this is an unresolved issue, and I would therefore ask the Cabinet Secretary if she could continue to engage with Church of Scotland. It was a representative from Church of Scotland who contacted myself and other members across this chamber in order to bring an amendment of this nature forward onto the housing bill. So if there are unresolved issues, there are still opportunities, in my view, even if it's not on the face of the bill, for us to look at them to make sure that we're not having properties sitting empty when in fact those properties could be used. Again, it goes back to the fact that we've got a shortage of homes right up and down the country, and I think that we should be using every lever possible in order to make sure that we're using the homes that we already have in existence. On that point, Presiding Officer, I will leave my remarks there and I'll have press number 79, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. The question is that Amendment 79 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 80 in the name of Megan Gallagher. Already debated with Amendment 79. Megan Gallagher to move or not move.
Move, please.
Question is that Amendment 80 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 192 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with Amendment 79. Edward Mountain to move or not move? Moved. Question is that Amendment 192 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 192 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 25, no 81. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 283 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with amendment 79. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
I will press.
The question is that amendment 283 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Richard Lockhead.
Vote no, please.
Thank you, Mr Lockhead. I'll make sure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Jim Fairley. Can I get Mr Fairley's microphone on, please? You're now connected to your microphone. Point of order.
My apologies, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Fairley. I'll make sure that's recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 283 in the name of Megan Gallagher is yes 44, no 63. There were no abstentions and the amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 81 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with amendment 79. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 81 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 193 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 79. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Not moved, Presiding.
That is not moved. I call amendment 82 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with amendment 79. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 82 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 194 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 79. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call amendment 83 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with amendment 79. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 83 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call amendment 84 in the name of Megan Gallagher, already debated with amendment 79. Megan Gallagher to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 84 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 195 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 79. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call Amendment 85 in the name of Megan Gallagher. Already debated with Amendment 79. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 85 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 86 in the name of Megan Gallagher. Already debated with Amendment 79. Megan Gallagher, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 86 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 196 in the name of Edward Mountain. Already debated with Amendment 79. Edward Mountain, move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call Amendment 8 in the name of Maggie Chapman. Already debated with Amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call Amendment 198 in the name of Maggie Chapman. Already debated with Amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 198 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament. Oh, no. I'm getting ahead of myself. Call Amendment 198A in the name of Maggie Chapman. Already debated with Amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Also moved.
That is moved. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 198A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division on this. Members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Ivan McKee. And can you do that again with the microphone, Mr McKee?
Didn't get connected, I would have voted no.
I'll make sure that is recorded, Mr McKee. And the result of the vote on amendment number 198A in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 22, no 85. There were no abstentions. That amendment is therefore not agreed. Maggie Chapman, to press or withdraw amendment 198.
Press.
Question is that amendment 198 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be division. The members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 198 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 22, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 197 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 197 be... No. Call Amendment 197A in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
Therefore, the question is that Amendment 197A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 197A in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 22, no 85. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call on Maggie Chapman to press or withdraw amendment 197.
Press.
Question therefore is that amendment 197 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division of members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 197 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 23, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 7 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call amendment 44 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 84 be agreed to. Are we 44 be agreed to? Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment 44 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 22, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 284 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
And I call amendment 284A in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question therefore is that amendment 284A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Order, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app would not connect. I would have voted no.
I'll make sure that's recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment 284A in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 22, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call on Maggie Chapman to press or withdraw amendment 284.
Press.
Question is that amendment 284 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Fergus Ewing.
No, I couldn't connect.
I'll make sure that vote is recorded, Mr Ewing. And the result of the vote on Amendment 284 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 23, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendments 394, 395, 396 and 397, all in the name of Edward Mountain, all previously debated with Amendment 79 by Edward Mountain, to move amendments 394 to 397 en bloc.
En bloc. Moved.
Thank you. Does any member object to a single question being put on amendments 394 to 397? No. Nobody objects. Therefore, the question is that amendments 394 to 397 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendments 394 to 397 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendments are therefore not agreed. I call amendment 285 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with amendment 79. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. Call amendment 286 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with amendment 79. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Move.
Question is that amendment 286 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the result of the vote on Amendment 286 in the name of Mark Griffin is yes 80, no 25. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call Amendment 287 in the name of Mark Griffin, already debated with Amendment 79. Mark Griffin, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call Amendment 37 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 79. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 37 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 23, no 85. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 288 in the name of Katie Clark, already debated with Amendment 79. Katie Clark to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 288 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote's now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 288 in the name of Katie Clark is yes 24, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 289 in the name of Katie Clark, already debated with amendment 79. Katie Clark to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 289 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 289 in the name of Katie Clark is yes 24, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We move now to Group 11, Tenants' Rights to Keep a Pet. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Maggie Chapman, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Point of order. Point of order, Remain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I seek your guidance. I am finding this fairly difficult in the sense in the last group, Presiding Officer, I had 9 amendments, which, given that I was allowed to speak for 5 minutes, allowed me 33 seconds to speak to each amendment. In this group, I will have 14 amendments, which gives me 21 seconds to push and give the reasons between each. Sorry, I'm finding it. I know that Presiding Officer, I know the First Minister may think that's more than sufficient by his comments, but actually I think it's a genuine point. We're here to make good legislation, I believe, and I find it really difficult to put an argument forward in 21 seconds for each amendment that I have. It gives me no chance to speak to other amendments. I have 50% of the amendments in this group, and yet I will have less than 50% of the time to speak in it. I wondered if there is some leeway, Presiding Officer, in the time. I don't want to string this out for any longer than is necessary, but I think 21 seconds is just too much, too little for each amendment.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. As you will be aware, the timings for the groupings were agreed with the business managers and should have been communicated to those that were participating in the debate. I think, as you will have found yesterday and indeed today, those in the chair are seeking to apply as much latitude as we can, reflecting the amount of ground that members are trying to cover. I think we are also conscious of the fact that we have had a late sitting yesterday. We're likely to have a late sitting again tonight and almost certainly next Tuesday as well. So we will exercise as much latitude as we can, but we need cooperation from members in accordance with what the Chamber voted on in terms of the business motion and timings. With that, we move to Group 11, which is Tenants' Rights to Keep a Pet. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Maggie Chapman, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Maggie Chapman to move Amendment 9 and speak to all amendments in the group. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move Amendment 9 in my name. Pets make a house a home, and that is what this part of the bill is trying to do by setting up a clear framework for tenants to make requests for their pet to live with them. There is a lack of pet-friendly rented homes in Scotland. A 2021 survey of landlords, letting agents and tenants on pets and rental properties conducted by YouGov on behalf of Cats Protection and Dogs Trust found that 68% of private Scottish landlords who don't currently allow pets in any or all of their properties say nothing would persuade them to do so. Currently, tenants are being denied the opportunity to experience the benefits of pet ownership simply because their contract says no pets. The bill will end blanket no pets policies by allowing tenants to request to keep a pet. Giving responsible tenants the right to request to keep a pet in their home, which landlords cannot unreasonably refuse, will decrease the burden on animal rehoming organisations such as Cats Protection. In 2023, Cats Protection took in the equivalent of around 3 cats each day due to landlords not allowing them in their properties. The current proposals have the potential to help relieve the large waitlists faced by rehoming organisations and allow them to focus their resources on other animals in need. I have a number of amendments to make this process work better, and these have been developed in partnership with Cats Protection, Dogs Trust and Sight Scotland. Amendments 87 and 15 reduce the time a tenant has to wait to get a response to a pet request from 42 to 30 days. Dogs Trust believes this would allow tenants to better plan for pet ownership, reduce any kennelling or cattery expenses and lessen the significant stress of not knowing if they will be able to keep their pet in their rented property. I thank the Scottish Government for their support for Amendment 87, which applies to private housing. I know it is reluctant to support the social housing version in 15, but supporting both of these would also ensure that private and social sector tenants are treated equally. Otherwise, we would be treating social and private tenants differently, and that's simply not fair. After discussing this for the best part of this year, I still have not heard a convincing argument as to why. Amendment 12 addresses a loophole in the proposed system. If a landlord does not meet the deadline, they are currently deemed to have refused consent to keep a pet, which is also not fair. Tenants have no way of knowing why the landlord does not consent to the pet, and therefore no ability to offer assurances to the landlord. Amendment 12 changes this, so the landlord is deemed to have consented if they do not reply within the timescales. This is not something new, and it's not untested. It's the same approach that appears in the bill for social housing. Again, there is no good reason at all why social and private tenancies should be treated differently. Amendments 9, 10, 13 and 14 cover assisted animals. These exempt assistant animals from the pet request process, granting an automatic right to have an assistant animal in a rented property. I've heard concerns that my amendments are already covered by the Equality Act, but the Act, of course, prohibits discrimination against disabled people, but there are no specific provisions for disabled tenants who need their assistance animals at home. Sight Scotland reports having to work with the landlords of blind and partially sighted people to ensure their assistant animals can live with them. If the Equality Act was perfectly clear on this point, this would not be happening. I'd like to provide a quote from a person with sight loss in Edinburgh who has repeatedly been refused a tenancy because they need their guide dog to live with them. And this is the quote. "It was very disheartening when I was told that I couldn't rent a property because of my guide dog. It made me feel very upset and frustrated. Even when I explained the laws and legislation, I was still told no, and that the letting agent had to take the landlord's side. It made me very wary of looking for a rental property, and I started to discount a lot of properties as the advert said, no pets. This left me with very limited choice of houses to pick from. The stress of finding a property is bad enough without having to explain my sight loss and why I have a guide dog as my mobility aid. Presiding Officer, disabled people should not be made to jump through the hoops of the Equality Act to prove that it covers having their assistance animals with them in their homes. There should instead be a clear and simple statement in Scottish housing law confirming that they can, and this is what my amendment does. In the interest of time, I won't comment on other people's amendments, only to ask Edward Mountain whether he has considered the requests that we discussed at stage 2 around exempting assistance animals from his amendment to get a professional cleaner. I'll be interested in his comments on that regard. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call Edward Mountain to speak to Amendment 199 and other amendments in the group. Mr Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I want to be clear at the outset that I'm a great supporter of pets. I've got 4 dogs myself, and I would never want to be seen as somebody stopping people having pets in their houses and their homes. So amendments 199, 200, 201, 216 and 217 requires that all notices regarding pets are sent by recorded delivery. Now, that may seem archaic, but it protects both the tenant and the landlord to ensure that the notices are sent and there is copies of them that are recorded. An unscrupulous landlord, for example, may say that he's responded to a notice from the tenant, and all that would be required at law is for him to sign an affidavit to say that he has sent a notice. Whether he has or not, he could just sign that. And that could happen, which is why I believe that sending notices by recorded delivery, especially when you're presuming in favour of one or the other, would be sensible. In fact, in most rented accommodation, notices are sent by recorded delivery. The Amendment 202 is a simple amendment that, while an appeal is carrying on regarding a pet, that the pet cannot be kept at the property. Amendment 203 means that if a tenant has applied to a tribunal to make a decision, that it can't apply again regarding that pet in that property unless there's been a material change in circumstances. Amendment 204 means that the landlord should be able to refuse consent for a pet if they have medical reasons for doing so. I give the example that if I get too close to cats, that I break out sneezing and come out in hives, for example, and therefore to go into a property that I've let that's got cats actually makes it extremely difficult for me. And there are other people with those sort of conditions, and that is the point that I'm trying to get round there. As far as Amendment 205 is that I would like to see ministers having to make provisions about when it's reasonable for a landlord to refuse consent within 6 months of the Act receiving royal assent. And 206 would mean, and I'll come to this separately, but I don't want to rush this, Amendment 206 and 2014 would mean that a landlord could be able to specify as a condition of rent that carpeted floors and soft furnishings should be cleaned by an independent company at the end of tenancy. Should be able to, would be my comment, not that they must be. That is the point, and it is a critical point, because sometimes we know that pets, and I have one that can be deliberately difficult and leave me messages in the morning, and it would only seem right that if that was the case, that I should clean up if I was renting the property when I leave. And also, Amendment 215 is about asking ministers to lay what they consider is reasonable when it comes to keeping a pet. 218 would require that the landlord does not consent to a pet. The tenant may not make further application unless there's been a material change in circumstances. 219 changes the presumption regarding the landlord's consent to be kept from automatically in favour to against. And that shouldn't be an issue, because if the Minister or the Cabinet Secretary has laid down regulations for the reason for refusal, they should be quite clear. Now, I want to answer the specific question that Maggie Chapman made regarding assistant animals. I absolutely consider assistant animals as critical to people's lives, and therefore I think the presumption should be in favour of keeping them. But assistant animals sometimes are not always the well-trained guide dogs that you have. They can also be dogs that keep you company. And therefore, I think the ability that the landlord may ask for the carpets to be cleaned would be suitable. It doesn't mean they have to. Now, Presiding Officer, there are lots of other amendments in this group. I'm just wondering if I can just probably sum up to say that Amendment 15 shortens the timescale from, I believe, 30 days, from 42 days, which I think is reasonable, to 30 days. I think that's too quick, especially if the landlord is not in a position to receive the notice, maybe on holiday, may not be able to. I mean, frankly, both parties should be talking to each other and ringing up and speaking on the telephone. I'll give way if I have time, Presiding Officer.
Maggie Chapman, briefly.
I thank Edward Mountain for taking my intervention. 30 days is more than 4 weeks. Does he not think that it would be appropriate for the landlord, if the landlord's going to be away for that period of time, that there is somebody else who could answer on the landlord's behalf? Because 30 days is an awful long time to leave renters in limbo. It may not be for a pet request. It could be for some other really urgent issue.
Edward Mountain.
Of course, not every landlord's in a position to appoint an agent, and I think 40 days is not unreasonable. 42 days is not unreasonable, especially if you consider the amount of time it takes government agencies and government ministers even to respond to requests for information. So I would leave it as it is, and, Presiding Officer, I will leave it at that stage and maybe listen to the other points.
Thank you, Mr Mountain. I now call the Cabinet Secretary to speak to Amendment 88 and other amendments in the group. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Beginning with Amendments 9, 10, 13, 14, 26 and 27 from Maggie Chapman on allowing private and social tenants to keep an assistance animal without the consent of the landlord. A similar group of amendments was disagreed at stage 2, and whilst I absolutely appreciate their intended effect, the very important point to make is that it's already the case that a disabled tenant can ask a landlord to keep an assistance animal under the Equality Act. And I'm really sorry to hear the case that Ms Chapman put to us, but that is a question of the existing law being applied and doesn't justify creating different provisions which can create a confusing landscape, so I can't support them. Yes, will do.
Briefly, Maggie Chapman.
So, thank you for taking my intervention. Given that the existing law clearly is not adequate, because Site Scotland and others have had repeatedly to go through this process, I cannot understand the rationale for not stating very clearly in our housing law why assistance animals should be deemed to be acceptable.
Cabinet Secretary.
It is just entirely, Presiding Officer, the fact that it's already part of our housing law that, as I said, a disabled tenant can ask a landlord to keep an assistance animal under the Equality Act. This can't be unreasonably refused. So I'm very happy to work with Ms Chapman and others on ensuring that that's being applied, but it doesn't justify an additional provision. On Amendment 87, however, I'm very grateful to Maggie Chapman and Emma Roddick for their engagement with me on this issue. In setting the timescale, it's important to make sure there's enough time for the landlord and the tenant to discuss the request, resolve any concerns and agree reasonable conditions. This ultimately helps avoid disputes as well, so I think the 30-day period is appropriate and I'm happy to support that. Amendment 12, this was considered but not agreed at stage 2, and due to concerns about the negative consequences of switching to assumed consent in the private rented sector. It'd be unclear how disputes would be resolved in cases where a landlord had a legitimate reason for a delayed response, and of course there's added complications if the tenant had obtained a pet in the meantime. We don't want to cause that confusion, so I can't support this amendment. On 15, this would replace the current 1-month timescale for a request to keep a pet in the social rented sector with not more than changing that to not more than 30 days. This is unnecessary. The period of 1 month is aligned with social landlords' other response timescales for other requests, and I think it's clearly helpful to keep for both landlords and tenants if there's a consistent approach which is taken. Turning to Edward Mountain's amendments 199 to 204 and 216 to 218. Firstly, 199 to 201 and 216 and 217. These are about requiring pet requests and related applications to be sent by recorded delivery. I have listened to Mr Mountain's position on this, but I think it's unnecessary. I think it would impose extra costs and additional administrative burdens on tenants and landlords who are accustomed to dealing with these things in the best way that suits them. Yes, I will do.
Remain. I hear the Cabinet Secretary's point of view. My point is that I'm trying to prove that there's no dubiety, so no one can say something has happened when it has happened. How will the Cabinet Secretary adjudicate in a situation where somebody says that the notice has been served and the other person says that they haven't received it? Whose side would she take?
Cabinet Secretary.
I wouldn't adjudicate on these matters, Presiding Officer. That would be for a tribunal or a court if it were escalated to that position. But the point is that right now it's up to the tenants and the landlord to use the mean that best suits them, and I don't think that we should change that. Amendment 202 would restrict a private tenant from keeping a pet until the tribunal has made a determination. However, before keeping a pet, tenants must already first have the permission of the landlord, or if this is disputed and appealed, they need to wait for the consent order from the tribunal. So this is not necessary and I can't support it. Amendments 203 and 218 would prevent tenants from making further requests to keep a pet following a dismissal appeal without a material change in circumstances. I think this is a bit rigid. I think it can be achieved in a more balanced way, probably through guidance, and in a way that encourages constructive discussion between landlords and tenants, and so I won't support that. 204 would allow reasonable refusal to keep a pet where the landlord has a medical reason. I hear what Mr Mountain says about his own aversion to cats, but really the detail of what's an unreasonable refusal and what are reasonable conditions are really best developed through consultation and in guidance, not in primary legislation. I turn to Amendments 88 to 93 and 102 to 104 in my name. These are technical. They revert 3 duties to make regulations back into powers. The powers enable ministers to make provision about when it's reasonable to keep a pet and about when a consent condition is reasonable. These powers were turned into duties at stage 2, and we must restore Parliament's role. Edward Mountain's Amendments 205 and 215 would instead require ministers to lay draft regulations within 6 months of royal assent. This isn't appropriate. However, I can assure Mr Mountain that draft regulations will be laid as soon as reasonably practicable after the powers take effect. And I would also assure him that it's very much my intention that they will be in place when the associated right to have a pet comes into force. On his other amendments, 206 and 214, on cleaning carpets, etc., before one could keep a pet, again, I think the detail of what's reasonable should be developed in consultation, and I firmly believe that that is the right approach. That, of course, is why the bill requires such consultation and why draft regulations must first be approved by Parliament. And finally, Presiding Officer, 219 would take the existing process in the social rented sector whereby failure of a social landlord to reply to a request is considered approval, and change this to deemed refusal. Processes in relation to keeping a pet in the SRS are well established and they're understood, and I can see no good reason to change this, so I won't support that amendment. But for all these reasons, I'd ask members to support 88 to 93 and 102 to 104, but ask others not to press. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Members will note that we've passed the agreed time limit for the debate on this group to finish. I exercise my power under Rule 9.8.4 AC to allow debate on this group to continue beyond that limit in order to avoid the debate being further curtailed. I call Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wish to speak in favour of the amendment brought by Maggie Chapman in regard to Amendments 13 and 14. This government and to some degree this Parliament are very good with rhetoric when it comes to disabled issues. They want to be supportive and say the right thing. But when it comes to action, often they do not follow the warm words. And yet again, we are seeing that in regard to what the Cabinet Secretary has said, that she and her government will not be supporting Amendments 13 and 14. I think on this occasion, Maggie Chapman is absolutely right in what she says. Other organisations have been in touch with me, and if the Cabinet Secretary is simply saying that this is already restating what the law is in Scotland, then surely it can do no harm when we are passing a new housing bill to support something that will give greater protection to those with disability. Again, she says that she is willing to work with Maggie Chapman and other MSPs going forward, but this is now the opportunity for us to do something. And I do hope that members across the chamber will think about not just giving warm words to disabled people, but actually doing something in law that will make their lives easier. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. Maggie Chapman to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 9.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I just thank Jeremy Balfour for his words of support just then. Presiding Officer, I'm not going to speak for too long, but I just want to raise one thing. The Cabinet Secretary talked about consistency within the social rented sector, about the 30 days or 1 month. Why is consistency there important, but consistency between the private rented sector and social rented sector is not? I still haven't heard convincing arguments why it's one rule for one and one rule for another in some of these amendments. But I'll leave my comments there, Presiding Officer.
Can I just confirm, Ms Chapman, that you intend to press?
Press. Thank you.
The question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 9 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 25, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 10 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with amendment 9. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call amendment 199 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 199 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 199 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 87 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with amendment 9. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 87 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. I'm just going to ask again, are we all agreed? We are agreed. I call amendment 200 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call Amendment 12 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated with Amendment 9. Maggie Chapman to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Craig Hoy for a point of order. I call Craig Hoy for a point of order.
Sorry, apologies, Presiding Officer. My app froze. I would have voted no.
Thank you. Mr Hoy will ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 12 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 24, no 85. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 201 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 201 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 201 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 43, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 202 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 202 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 202 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 69. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 203 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 203 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 203 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 41, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 88 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 9. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 88 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 88 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 60, no 49. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call Amendment 89 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 9. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 89 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 89 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 59, no 48. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 204 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 204 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 204 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 90 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 9. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 90 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Okay. I would be grateful if colleagues would be very clear when calling out. That's helpful. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 90 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 99, no 9. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 205 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 205 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 205 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 41, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 91 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 9. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 91 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 91 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 59, no 50. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 92 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 9. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 92 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 92 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 60, no 47. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 206 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 9. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 206 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 206 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated, excuse me, the result of the vote on amendment number 206 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 93 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 9. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 93 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 93 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 101, no 8. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. And we move to Group 12. Tenants' right to make changes to let property. I call amendment 207 in the name of Edward Mountain, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Edward Mountain to move amendment 207 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And at the beginning, I'm going to say I move Amendment 207. Now, a lot of the confusion over this group of amendments would have been clarified if we knew what Category 1 and Category 2 changes were. In the big business regulatory impact assessment, it gave some ideas that Category 1 changes would include simple things as putting up pictures and posters, and Category 2 might include painting of walls. I mean, I have to say, from a personal point of view, that if a tenant moves in and wants to make the property their home, putting up pictures and posters and such thing is something that I would normally expect them to do. And I'd be surprised, actually, in many cases, if they weren't able to do that. And Category 2 changes, such as painting of rooms, if that's what it were, I believe should be agreed with the landlord in advance. Now, Amendments 208, 209 and 211 require notices between the landlord and tenant regarding Category 2 changes to be sent in writing and by recorded delivery. And I know the Cabinet Secretary doesn't accept my opinion on this, but what I'm trying to do is make sure there's no confusion at a later date, and it doesn't set the landlord off against the tenant, because there's nothing worse when that happens when somebody's trying to move out of their home and move to a different property. Now, Amendment 210 was that a tenant must return any Category 2 changes on the let property to their original state. Now, that to me seemed perfectly sensible if Category 2 changes included things like painting properties. I've seen lots of properties where the colour scheme that have been put up by the tenant may not be one that the landlord necessarily recognises as a nice one. Most landlords would go with a bland colour so that a tenant could move in at a date and find that acceptable. Sometimes I've seen bright purples, fluorescent pinks with blue stars on them, and oh, Mr Whitfield saying that's his house. I haven't been to your house, Mr Whitfield. But I think the point is that all I'm trying to do is suggest that at the end of a tenancy, it should be returned to the landlord in the state that it was at the beginning. Now, I will take an intervention, Presiding Officer.
Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the member for taking my intervention. Under these two amendments, 207 and 210, is it his contention that disabled people should have to pay to take out disabled aids that have been put in around a property, because those could potentially fit into both of these amendments?
And I thank the member for that intervention. I want to come on to this specific point, if I may, because the member will have seen, because I know she kept an eagle eye, Presiding Officer, on the various amendments which was put forward. And I put forward an Amendment 399, which was not selected by the Presiding Officer. And the reason why I put this manuscript amendment through later is because I'd had a letter which I received 47 minutes after the lodging deadline from the Cabinet Secretary, saying that I was being discriminatory against disabled people by not allowing changes under Category 1 to allow them to put disabled access. Actually, I never wanted to do that, and my manuscript amendment was to be entirely clear to allow disabled people to put in any things that they wanted to make their life easier within the house, providing it didn't require structural changes. Because if there were structural changes, of course, as Ms Chapman would know, Presiding Officer, it would require a building warrant to be able to allow that in most cases to go forward. So I was disappointed I wasn't able to clarify that. And I do think a lot of the disagreement that there may be between the Cabinet Secretary and myself, Presiding Officer, is because it wasn't clear what Category 1 and Category 2 changes are. Now, I also would just briefly like to speak to the other amendments in the group, is that Maggie Chapman's Amendment 94 seeks to get a change from 42 days to 30. I have to say that I think 42 days is right for the reason that Cabinet Secretary gave earlier. Now, I'm disappointed with Amendments 95, 96, 98 and 99, Presiding Officer, because these were this is changing the amendments that I submitted at stage 2 and was agreed by the committee that saying that ministers must specify the changes, and the Cabinet Secretary is changing that back to May. I think that's disappointing, and I think it's overriding the discussion that was had at the committee. Amendments 212 and 213 do exactly the same, and I want to just remind people about that manuscript amendment. I'd just also probably mention, if I may, Presiding Officer, Amendment 38 in the name of Maggie Chapman, where tenants can make changes to properties if those changes promote nature recovery. Now, I absolutely understand why that might be appropriate, and tenants may want to change their garden into vegetable gardens and may want to make those changes. But if those gardens are established and already have trees and plants in them which prove the amenity of the property, I think that's something they need to negotiate with the landlord, rather than just have a normal automatic right to do so. Presiding Officer, I'll probably leave it at there, listen to the other arguments, and I'll get a chance, I believe, Presiding Officer, to sum up. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I call Maggie Chapman to speak to Amendment 94 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A couple of amendments in this group. Amendment 252 establishes the right to grow in outdoor spaces of rented properties. Renters could submit a Category 2 change request, and this should not be unreasonably refused. The physical and mental well-being, the physical and mental health benefits of gardening and growing your own food are well established, and this amendment ensures that there could be no undue barriers to renters using outdoor spaces that are part of the property they rent to grow their own, as well as to promote animal and insect life, such as by planting flowers which support pollinators. Domestic gardens can be mini havens for nature, and this kind of action is vital as we are facing a nature emergency, with many of Scotland's animal, insect and plant species threatened with extinction. Urban creep, whereby green space in already urban areas is lost, such as when gardens are turned into driveways, is driving nature loss and urban flooding. And we need to do much more to ensure green space is protected and looked after. And my Amendment 252 is a small contribution to that. And according to TDS, which runs the Safe Deposit Scotland scheme, disagreements over gardening is the 5th most common reason for deposit disputes. And so clearly having more clarity here will benefit both tenants and landlords. And with young people in the most deprived areas of Scotland having significantly worse access to play space, the amendment also seeks to make it easier for modest changes to be made to garden and other spaces so that they can enjoy the benefits of outdoor play. I have listened carefully to comments at stage 2, and I have changed Category 1, which would not require approval, to Category 2, which would. It would still allow landlords to refuse if they felt the ask was unreasonable, and so appropriate safeguards are there. Before I close, Presiding Officer, Amendment 94 reduces the timescale for landlords to respond to a property change request. Having supported the timescale for pet requests, I look forward to government support on this amendment, and I'm grateful for the conversations we've had on this in recent weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary to speak to Amendment 95 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I shall begin with Edward Mountain's Amendments 207 and 210, which would mean a tenant is required to reinstate the property to its original condition following a Category 1 or 2 change. Now, I understand the provision may reflect some landlords' concerns, some of which will be perfectly legitimate. However, I don't think that the inclusion of a blanket provision on the face of the bill is the right approach to take. I think that the substance of the approach, that kind of restriction, is likely to be disproportionate, but actually the best way to test all of that is to do consultation and to set out what is to be taken forward in secondary legislation, which of course he can be part of. Amendment 208 and 209, also in Mr Mountain's name, relates again to the question of recorded delivery, this time a request for a Category 2 change and its response. As before, the landlord and the tenant should be free to agree the form of written communication that will be used during the tenancy, and I think it's common for email to be used. So whilst I understand his concerns. I can't support that. Turning to Maggie Chapman in Amendment 38, this would mean that certain changes to outdoor space connected with a let property would be a Category 2 change, and a tenant would have the right to request and not be unreasonably refused. I have a lot of sympathy with what Maggie Chapman has discussed, and I think people's ability to enjoy green space is absolutely fundamental, not only to feeling comfortable at home, but also to their mental and physical well-being. So I don't have any objection in principle that prescribed changes should include the use of properties outside space. However, I'm afraid the drafting of this amendment is too broadly framed. As it's drafted, it would apply to a very broad range of changes, and it would face, we believe, problems with implementation, particularly in respect of communal gardens. So that would have to be made clearer in any drafting. I don't want to create confusion for landlords and tenants, so I can't support that one. And again, it comes to what I said earlier, which is that the best way to develop the detail of all of this is through secondary legislation supported by consultation and engagement with tenants and landlords. And I'll be very pleased to include some of these matters that Maggie Chapman raises in that work. I also welcome her Amendment 94, which would reduce to 30 days the period in which a landlord in the PRS must respond to a request to make changes to a let property. If agreed, of course, this will mirror the time frame for response to a PET request proposed under Amendment 87, and it will ensure that consistency that we're trying to support. Turning to my amendments in the group, I'm seeking Parliament's support for Amendments 95 to 100, which make changes to various duties to make regulations regarding requests to make changes to the let property. As before, these duties were originally set out as powers in the bill, but a changes at stage 2 turned them into duties. And whilst they're duties, Parliament's role is undermined. So my amendments are about restoring Parliament's role in scrutinising what the government do, and I would just assure Mr Mountain that he ought not to be disappointed about that, because it's about ensuring that Parliament has its rightful place in approving regulations. Amendments 212 and 213, also in my name, are intended to reverse changes made at stage 2, the effect of which would mean it was always reasonable for structural change, however minor, to be refused. I have obviously listened to what Mr Mountain said. I'm not able to speak to the manuscript amendment that he refers to because it's not up for debate, but these restrictions would limit our ability to allow changes that support disabled people and their families, for example, to install support aids. This is not something I would want. I'm quite sure it's not something Mr Mountain would want either. Yes, I'm happy to.
Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much. I just seek from the Cabinet Secretary, presiding officer, some clarity on the definition of structural change. Structural change means one thing to me as a surveyor, it may mean something different to her, and I'd like to know what she means, presiding officer, by structural change.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in the context that I've referred to, I suppose we're talking about things being affixed to walls. But of course, definitions of these things is exactly why I have been stressing the point that consulting on these matters and making the changes via secondary regulations is the appropriate way to do it. But I've spoken about support aids because that involves affixing items to walls. But just to reassure members, the regulation-making powers in the bill will be subject to affirmative power, and this will ensure powers are exercised appropriately and that a reasonable balance is achieved, firstly between tenants' rights and those of the landlord, and also that Parliament have a fulsome part in that.
Thank you, and I call Edward Mountain to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 207.
Thank you very much, presiding officer, and I've listened to the arguments that have been put forward today. I have to say I could go through all the reasons why I don't actually agree with them, and I don't think the Cabinet Secretary's definition of a structural change would be one that's recognised. Affixing things to the wall is not changing the structure of the property. Structural changes, by definition in building, would require, in most cases, building warrant to be approved. I have heard the arguments, and I'm just going to make this case one more time on recorded delivery and delivering of notices. I guarantee that this will be a recipe for disaster and a recipe for argument. In my life as a landlord, I've tried to avoid that, And I think the Cabinet Secretary and those people who vote not to have them served by recorded delivery are making a mistake. Presiding Officer, I'll leave it there because I know the time is short.
I just confirm, Mr Mountain, you are pressing.
Yes, I am pressing, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Point of order, Maggie Chapman.
Very sorry, Presiding Officer. In my remarks, I referred to Amendment 252. I should have been referring to Amendment 38. That was my error. Apologies for that.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. Your comments are recorded. The question is that Amendment 207 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Brian Whittle for a point of order.
That wouldn't connect, Presiding Officer. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 207 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 40, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 208 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated with amendment 207. Edward Mountain to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 208 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 208 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 41, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 94 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated, with amendment 207. Maggie Chapman to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 94 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 94 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 83, no 24. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 209 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated, with amendment 207. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. I call amendment 210 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated, with amendment 207. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 210 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 210 in the name of Edward Mountain is yes 39, no 69. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 211 in the name of Edward Mountain, already debated, with amendment 207. Edward Mountain, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Thank you. The amendment is not moved. I call amendment 95 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with amendment 207. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally?
Moved.
Thank you. And the question is that amendment 95 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 95 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 61, no 46. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 96 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with amendment 207. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 96 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 96 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 58, no 49. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 212 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated, with amendment number 207, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 212 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Douglas Ross for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I could connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Ross. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 212 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 69, no 39. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 38 in the name of Maggie Chapman, already debated, with amendment 207. Maggie Chapman, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 38 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 38 in the name of Maggie Chapman is yes 8, no 98. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendments 97, 98 and 99, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, and all previously debated, with amendment 207. I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move amendments 97 to 99 en bloc.
Moved en bloc.
Does any member object to a single question being put on amendments 97 to 99? There are objections to that. Therefore, we will put these questions individually. And the question is that amendment 97 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Angus Robertson for a point of order.
Unfortunately, my device would not register my vote, which would have been for a yes.
Thank you, Mr Robertson. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 97 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 100, no 8. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that amendment 98 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 98 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 60, no 47. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The question is that amendment 99 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 99 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 61, no 47. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 213 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 207. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Formally moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 213 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 213 in the name of Cabinet Secretary is yes 68, no 39. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. I call amendment 100 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 207. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 100 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 100 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary is yes 99, no 8. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. And I suggest that we call a comfort break at this time and return sharp to the chamber at 6:20 p.m. Thank you.